Alrighty students, it's Mr. Arevalo with another new lesson, and for today's lesson we're going to be focusing on Box 1, 9.3, equivalent fractions and decimals. Okay? And for today's MP, I want us to focus on MP4, which is Model with Mathematics, and this simply means that you can use a variety of different strategies to show that you can solve a problem. So again, you can solve a problem in more than one way. Okay, and for Box 3, our purpose, today we will record tenths and hundredths as fractions and decimals. Okay, give you some time. Alrighty, on the bow, you know what to do in 3, 2, and today we will record tenths and hundredths as fractions and decimals. Awesome job, guys. Awesome. Going into Box 4, our APK, activating our prior knowledge. And the instructions read as, write the mixed number as a decimal. Okay? So that seems like pretty simple instructions. So I have 3 5/10 for my first APK problem. And when I write this as a decimal, it's going to equal 3.5. Remember, I look at the denominator, it's in the tenths place. The 3 gets carried over here, and then the 5 gets carried over here. I don't put another 0 behind that 5 because I'm working with tenths. Okay? Next, going into 14 and 20 100ths. So again, this would be written out as 14.20. And I looked at the hundredths place, my denominator. Okay? Not hundredths place, sorry. I looked at the denominator, which was a hundredth. Okay? And then I just transferred the whole number over, and then I transferred the numerator over. Okay? And that's how I got 14.20 or 14.20. Alrighty. Pretty easy problems. Going into our vocabulary terms. Our first vocabulary word is going to be a decimal. Okay? And a decimal is a number, okay, a number that uses a decimal point and digits, okay, to represent tenths, hundredths, etc. As in this case, I'm working with ones, then I have my tenths, then I have my hundredths, okay? The decimal goes right in the middle, okay? And then that's enough with that. So let's go into our next vocabulary term, which is a decimal point, okay? A decimal point. And this is a symbol used to separate the ones and tenths place in a decimal, okay? The ones and tenths place in a decimal. So here I have my ones, here I have my tenths, and the decimal point is right in the middle, and it is separating those, okay? Just kind of keep that in mind. And then lastly, we have equivalent, okay? Equivalent. And equivalent means having the same value or the same amount, okay? As in this case, I have 0.30, which is equal to, in fraction form, as 30 over 100ths, okay? And essentially, I'm just renaming it, right? I'm taking the same number and I'm just writing it differently. I'm just renaming that. Alrighty, going into Box 6, our critical attribute. Let's go ahead and look at these steps. And let's try to make sense of what's going on. Okay, so step 1 says look at the number. And by number, I mean fraction, right? Okay, so in this case, I have 8 tenths, or I'm going to have 80 over 100, okay, 80 100ths. I wouldn't have both of those, but I just wanted to show you what you would do if you were working with tenths, or if you were working with hundredths, okay? Remember, we look at the denominator, right? And that's what kind of helps us out as we go into our next step, which is step 2. And step 2 says if it wants it in hundreds, then I add a 0. So for example, if it wants it in hundreds, I would have 8/10, right? And then I would just simply add a 0, okay? But I need to add a 0 right here to the numerator and a 0 to the denominator. And then when I write it out, again, I would just write it out as 0.80 in decimal form, okay? So just kind of keep in mind that the instruction for today's lesson, okay, what it's going to want you to do is it's going to want you to turn a fraction into, you know, the tenths or the hundredths. So you have to figure out which one you're working with to begin with, okay? And then step 3 says if it wants it in tenths, then we just subtract the 0, okay? And you can see that I subtracted the 0 from here, subtracted the 0 from here, and then I lastly subtracted the 0 from there. So that would just be written out as 8/10 or 0.8. And again, it all depends on what you start off with. If you start off with tenths, then they're going to want it in 100ths, which is then I just add a 0. And if they if they start with 100ths, then they want it in tenths, and I just subtract a 0. Okay? Pretty simple. Alrighty. Let's go check out some example problems, sorry. Going into box 7, write the number as hundredths in fraction form and decimal form. So again, I have to be very clear as I'm reading these instructions, okay, because it does say hundredths, right? It wants it in hundredths. So that tells me what I need to change it to. So I have a fraction right here. I have 6/10, okay, and that 10 right there tells me that I need to convert it into hundredths. So again, step 1, I looked at the number. Now step 2 says if it wants it in hundredths, I simply add a 0. Okay, but remember, I need to add a 0 in fraction form and in decimal form, okay? So I should write 2 different numbers right there. So first I'm going to write 60 over 100, okay? Remember, I just added the 0 to the 6 and the 10. And then I would write it out as 0.60, okay? Pretty simple, right? We started off with tenths. We need to change it into 100ths, and the way that we do that is that we add a 0, okay, to the fraction and to the decimal, okay? So kind of keep in mind that we added the 0 right here, added a 0 right here, and then we added this 0 right there, okay? Alrighty, going into our next example problem, I have the decimal 0.4, okay, and this is going to equal, again, add a 0, 40 over 100, okay? And then lastly, my decimal would be 0.40. Mr. Arevalo, does it matter which one we put first, whether it's a fraction or decimal? It doesn't really matter, okay, as long as you put both of them, okay, because it does want fraction form and decimal. And that's it, okay? Again, I added my 0 right here. You guys can see that. I added 1 0 right there, the 0 right there, and the 0 right there. So that tells me that I did everything correct and that I'm done. Box 8, our non-example. Where is the mistake? I'll give you some time. Please make sure that you talk this over with your partner. Try to figure out where is the mistake at, okay? Alrighty. So they started off with 0.5, and then they said this is equal to 5 over 100, which in decimal form equals 0.50. So you can see there's a couple of mistakes right here, right? Well, mainly one that I see, but some of you might see some other ones, because it can be kind of confusing because we don't have the instructions, right? But just remember, use the instructions based off of box 7, which they write the number as hundredths in fraction form and decimal form. So the one mistake then that I see, okay, is that they forgot to add the 0 right here to our numerator of 5. So it should have been 50 over 100, but they forgot to add that 0, okay? They added the 0 for 0.50 right here. They added this 0 and they added this 0. They simply forgot to add this 0, okay? So again, that's when we're working with tenths and they want us to convert it into hundredths, okay? So kind of keep that in mind, that we need to make sure that we read the instructions carefully based off of what it's asking, okay? Going into box 9, our critical attribute connection. Alrighty, so step 1, we are going to look at the denominator, okay? Look at the denominator. It's either going to be a 10 or a 100, okay? A tenth or a hundredth, sorry. And step 2, if it wants it in hundredths, right? Hundredths, H-U-N-D-R-E-D-T-H-S. If it wants it in hundredths, we need to add a 0, okay? And step 3 says, if it wants it in tenths, then we simply subtract, right? We subtract a 0, okay? So let's go look into our sample problems. Write the number as tenths in fraction form and decimal form. So again, please make sure that you read the instructions. It wants it in fraction form and decimal form, and it's asking for tenths, okay? So we need to convert the hundredths into tenths. Alrighty, so we have 21 hundredths for our first sample problem. And because we're working in hundredths, right, step 3 says if it wants it in tenths, then we subtract a 0. And that's it, okay? So let me show you how it would look. Once I subtracted the 0, subtract 1 from the numerator, subtract the 0 from the denominator. So this is going to equal 20. Sorry. What is Mr. Revlo doing? I meant to go fix this real quick. Meant to write 2 over 10, okay? I forgot. We subtracted the 0, okay? 2 over 10. And then in decimal form, this would just be simply 0.2, okay? 0.2. Now we're going to write the number as tenths in fraction form and decimal form for 0.90. Alrighty, so when we're doing this, again, I simply just subtract the 0, okay? It doesn't matter if it starts in decimal form or fraction form. It really does not matter, okay? Just kind of keep that in mind. 0.9, and then 9 over 10, okay? So kind of keep in mind that they can start with the fraction or they can start with the decimal. But again, you still need to make sure that you write it, the new numbers, right, in decimal form and fraction form. Showing that you've converted from the hundredths to the tenths, okay? Alrighty, going on. Hopefully you got both of those. They were pretty simple problems, okay? But again, if you didn't, try to figure out where your mistake was at. Maybe you misread the instructions. Maybe you didn't read the instructions at all. Okay, so again, we can just be careful and attend to precision. Going into box 11, our recap. Today, give me 1 second. Sorry, today we recorded tenths and hundredths as fractions, and decimals. Okay? As fractions and decimals. For your homework and your share and show problems, your collaborative work, I want you to focus on problems 2 through 7 and 18 on pages 369 through 370. Your homework is to do 9.3 front and back. And if you have any questions, you're curious about anything, or even if I made a mistake or anything, let me know, okay? Alrighty, see you in the next lesson.